How are you using AI for real estate so let's dive into that aspect of it because I think a lot of investors, a lot of people can learn from that and see what they can do with AI.
Yeah, definitely. To me, like ChatGPT is like the cheat code to life. I think one of the things as an investor, and we kind of talked about this at the beginning of like sitting on the fence and waiting. It's a lot around like what are my options, what is real, right? And essentially bouncing ideas off of people. And that's one thing throughout my entire journey in real estate is like I just ask people a lot of questions, like real estate brokers, mortgage brokers, contractors. And what you'll typically find is that someone's passionate about what their craft and what they do, they're more than happy to share information, right? Now, you obviously have like the gurus of the world, but again, real estate has been around for like ever. So everyone has bought houses in that regards, right? As far as knowledge goes. The thing with ChatGPT, the way that I leverage ChatGPT is really essentially asking it questions and getting direction from it. Now, with any of these like chatbot AI things, right, it could essentially be incorrect. But what I did with this property was I essentially found it a couple of weeks before I purchased it, went to ChatGPT, and as I was working with the real estate agent, I asked the real estate agent, "What do we think about the price? Like, do we think the home is priced correctly?" And she's like, I think it's actually like priced correct. And just for me, like I'm trying to shoot for the stars and fall somewhere like in between, right? And so I was like to her, I said, I feel like we should probably negotiate something. So I went to ChatGPT, and the paid version of it is only $20 a month, right? And I prompted it. I said, I'm looking at purchasing this house and put my address in. Give me examples of comps in this neighborhood, knowing that this house has not been updated since 1980, right? What comps are comparable to this home? And what do you think the asking price could be for this house, right? This thing came back and essentially spit out like 6 examples of homes that essentially were fully renovated, not renovated, broke it down by the per square footage of what these houses were going for versus what my house was going for, right? And came back and said, I think you should ask for it for this price. And so that was essentially the direction and like again a point of being like, hey, I have a justification for asking for a price off. I literally had it right up and I gave it to my real estate agent. I said, let's give this to the seller's agent and see where it starts, right? And that essentially kicked off the first part of it. And that's how we started negotiation because I had a justification and a comparison. It would have took me so long to figure that out myself. I wouldn't even known where to begin. And so that's the first part of how I started off with AI on this house.
That's $20 well spent, right?
Yeah, so great.
So great. So you use ChatGPT AI
Yep.
for the negotiation part. What's
Yep.
next?
So essentially, what happens? So we get into negotiation with them, and we go through and we get the inspection report back. And so the inspection report back has everything. And again, the house was in 1925, not updated since 1980. I already knew that I was going to gut this entire house, right? They didn't know what I was doing, but I knew that I was going to do that. So honestly, whatever came back in the inspection report, I really didn't care. But what I did is I took the inspection report, I uploaded it into ChatGPT, and I said, what areas could I essentially ask for discounts off based on understanding what the original negotiation was? And when you use ChatGPT, right? When you start a chat, that chat is essentially learning all from that one topic. So if you keep one topic going, it's going to keep referencing back to the original things, right? And so uploaded it and it was like, I think that you should be able to ask for this amount of discount off based on the things that were flagged. And again, it gave me a talking point to essentially go over. And again, a good justification. I wasn't just asking for a random amount off. There was some thought that was behind it. So we then went and sent that off to them, and then we were able to negotiate another 10K off of it because of like the issues it found. Um, this part's a little cheeky, is so like pulled a total HGTV move here, right? And so in Nashville, they buy houses and they knock them down, right? Well, this couple lived in this house for like 30 plus years. So I knew that like this home meant a lot to them. And so what I did is I asked ChatGPT to write me an HGTV letter of why I wanted to buy their house. And I told him I wasn't going to knock it down. I gave it to the real estate agent. I said, can you give this letter to the seller? Because there was someone else that also tried to start going into the deal. And so they gave them the letter. And so then they picked me to buy the house.
Awesome. You got like lifetime ChatGPT just from that negotiation of
Yeah. Yeah.
of the inspection
100%.
report, right?
Yeah, and so that has like kicked me off now, and like every thought and like that I have around real estate, I literally prompt it. And I think my biggest thing now, what I do is I ask ChatGPT to ask me questions, right? So a current example of what I'm doing is trying to figure out like what am I going to do in 2025 and 2026 as far as real estate. I literally pull up my phone and they have a talk feature. I just ramble. I give them the information on the property and say, what are the ways that I could optimize it? And it has come up with so many different strategies that I didn't even think possible that gave me essentially direction to then start digging deeper into.
Give us some examples.
Yeah. So one of the things, one of my biggest learnings I've ever had in my real estate journey was that when I pulled that HELOC out on the house to build the ADU, this is so terrible, is that I didn't realize that it was a variable rate. Right. And so when I pulled it out in, 2021, 2022, interest rates, everyone, we're thriving in those interest rates. Well, with a variable rate, the way that that works is essentially there is a cap, but it can adjust based on what the market is doing. And so 2023, 2024, right, that interest rate continued to go up and my monthly payments on my HELOC continued to go up as well, meaning it was impacting my monthly cash flow, right? So now I was in a situation of I can't refinance the front house because I have a 2.99% interest rate on that house. I'm going to keep that for my life. And the HELOC, I'm essentially in this weird situation where I have essentially a line of credit out. So I pulled, I explained this scenario to ChatGPT and it essentially gave me a couple options. Option one was to look at a home equity loan, right? Do I essentially pay off the HELOC with pulling equity out of the house again because I have more appreciation? And then it gave me the cons of that, right? The benefits are is I get out of this variable interest rate, I have a standard rate, but I also don't know if I'm going to keep that real estate property for more than the next 2 to 3 years, right? So it doesn't necessarily make sense to go and take another line of credit out and then pay, say, $5,000 to get that mortgage out, right? I'm kind of in the same place. The second thing it then suggested is selling the Memphis house and essentially paying and pulling my money out of the Memphis house and paying down the HELOC. So then that way I'm essentially lowering that actual loan itself and then improving and optimizing my performance on that one. The third one, which was the craziest one, and this is what I'm kind of like on this whole wave now, is like the concept of operation at scale, right? So one of its suggestions that it made was to essentially consolidate all the properties, sell all the properties, and buy an apartment complex, right? And so that then set me on this whole journey now where, I'm now investigating like, would it make sense for me to consolidate all my properties and then go buy an apartment complex? And that's where I'm kicking off now.
Yeah. While apartment complexes are great, there are pros and cons, and I'm sure about that. And one of the things that I have kind of personally not invested into apartment complexes is majority of the times on the commercial side, the interest rates are, basically you have to refi every 5 years or 6 years or something like that. So it's not like a standard 30 years. So while there are people and companies who only invest into apartment complexes and commercial. But then I have also talked to people where they started off as a commercial, but then they pivoted more towards the single family homes or the residential side of the ball game. But they're doing it in volume. So it kind of becomes commercial at that. But from a mortgage standpoint, it's still residential mortgage where it's locked in for 30 years. So again, food for thought.
Yeah, no, it's and it's so interesting. It actually said the same thing, right? The pros and cons of it, right? Is it then said, the interest rates. And so what I started doing is, actually asking it to run numbers for me. So now I'm using ChatGPT to run all my numbers. And the really cool thing is in some of them, you can essentially just drop the link to the listing and it will give you all the scenarios of it. And that's exactly what's happening now of what I'm finding out with these apartments is one, I didn't know what a DSCR loan was to begin with. ChatGPT educated me on that. And like exactly what you said, the math's just not mathing out right now with the interest rates, right?
Yeah.
And so again, it's leveraging it to understand what potential options and then continue to dig a little bit deeper.
And Joe, have you investigated on the tax side of things, how to save taxes or I know that you were doing something. So where is that going?
Yeah. So again, same thing. It's not, I'm like the biggest cheerleader for ChatGPT, but again, my like, financial literacy came from like my parents. My dad's like the best dude in the entire world. Worked at the same company for 40 years. His whole thing was retire, save money. And so, understanding taxes wasn't anything that we learned in school or anything like that. And so I've leveraged ChatGPT to understand like, I have this real estate portfolio. What can I do? So last year, right before tax season started, I again started investigating like, what could I do with these properties? First thing that I learned about was cost segregations, and I didn't know anything about that. And so it essentially drove me in examples of all of these things. And could that be a strategy? The second thing that I learned was that, short-term rental loopholes, right? The idea of essentially leveraging your current property and doing a short-term rental for a short amount of time to be able to then write off some money on your W-2s. And so understood all of these different strategies of what is like potential. Since my situation is I'm passively investing in it, and my current role doesn't allow me to essentially do it 24 hours a day, a little bit stuck. But I think the main thing it's taught me is just like actually how taxes work and what strategies do exist